Oletko valmis makumatkalle, joka vie sinut suoraan Prioratin sydämeen Kataloniaan? Clos Alkio yhdistää perinteet ja modernin viinin valmistuksen. Luomme ainutlaatuisia viinejä, jotka kertovat tarinoita alkuperästään. Viinit valmistetaan käsityönä luonnonmukaisin menetelmin, alueen perinteitä kunnioittaen. Tutustu verkkosivuillamme laajaan valikoimaan mielenkiintoisia uutuuksia viinin harrastajille Aino, Hiitola, Femme de Vida ja Caminito a Motel. Clos Alkio, suomalainen viinitila Prioratissa.
Hei ja tervetuloa Viinipodin kesäekstran pariin. Tällä kertaa studiossa olen yksin, minä Samuli Pasanen, ja ollaan poikkeuksellisesti kesällä täällä studiossa, sillä me saatiin yllätysvieraaksi australialainen viinintekijä Dean Hewitson. Ja tänään tullaan kuulemaan englanninkielinen haastattelu viinintekijän kanssa. Pidetään tämä alkulätinä tänään lyhyenä, ei ole juoruja Kemion toreilta, mutta alkuun kiitetään meidän yhteistyökumppania Temptechia, jonka viinikaapit pitää minunkin viinini turvassa, oikeassa lämpötilassa ja kosteudessa. Ja kiitetään myös Clos Alkiota ja Decateria, jotka sponssaavat tätä podia. Mä oon itse tosi mielenkiinnolla odotan, mitä tästä haastattelusta tulee. Australia on tosi mielenkiintoinen viinimaa. Mä oon itse ollut 2013 Rutherglenissa tekemässä sadonkorjuuta ja jonkin verran reppureissasin sitten sen jälkeen pitkin Australiaa ja yritin maistella mahdollisimman paljon viinejä. Maailma nyt on muuttunut sen jälkeen jo paljon ja kiva päästä kuulemaan, että miltä se Australian meininki tällä hetkellä näyttää Deanin kanssa. Ja odotan myös innolla, että mitäs viinejä päästään maistamaan. Dean tuo mukanaan muutaman viinin ja sitten mäkin olen valinnut yhden viinin mukaan nimenomaan tältä Rutherglenista. Hewitson-viinitilana on itselle tuttu. Mä oon joskus aikanaan, kun ollut Alkossa töissä, niin aika paljonkin myynyt yhtä Hewitsonin viiniä. Niin kiva päästä juttelemaan Deanin kanssa. Pidemmittä puhetta, mä pyydän Deanin studioon mukaan, niin päästään juttelemaan Australian viineistä. Dean Hewitson, welcome to the Wine Pod.
Thank you, Samali. It's a pleasure to be here.
How are you?
I'm really well, thank you. I had a terrific flight here to Finland, and it's great to be back.
That's my first question. You're in Finland. How come? And this is not your first time.
I have been coming to Finland for about 25 years now. Jean-Francois from Viindirect, the owner of Viindirect Importing and Distribution Company, is a very old friend of mine from university days. We studied together 35 years ago at UC Davis in California.
Okay.
We were studying wine and we remained friends. And at the same time, we started our respective businesses. So at the same time, when I started my own winery and wine company, Jean-Francois decided to move here to Helsinki, marry his girlfriend, Hannah, and set up a wine importing business. And he gave me a call and he said, have you got some wine for me? That's how it all started 25 years ago.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Great.
It's been a great journey.
Today I was thinking we're going to, of course, talk about your wines, and we're going to taste your wines, and then we have a special something to taste from another part of Australia.
I see that.
But I was thinking maybe we start with the wine and then talk more in general about how is the Australian wine business today and wine market, and how does it look like from the down under perspective?
Okay, good question. That's a big question.
It's a big question.
It's a big question. We've been making wine in Australia basically since the English settled it. The vines came on the first fleet in the late 1700s. And that's the same with most countries that were settled by the Europeans. They always brought with them a wine industry. And that's a really interesting sort of concept, that wine was considered such an important part of living, of life in general, that they brought a wine industry in every country in the New World. And so Australia, the same thing. And that evolution actually has been really interesting. But that's, I guess, slightly different story to your question. How is the industry?
Well, we can start from the history as well, because like either way, I think we want to cover like the history and where we are now. And so maybe if we start with the history a bit, and I'm going to pour us a little bit of wine, and this is Madame M.
Madame M, Blanc and Blanc. Yeah. Well, this vineyard and some of the other vineyards I control actually really do illustrate the history of the Australian wine industry. And I mentioned the very early beginnings, but probably a very significant moment in Australia was when this young man called James Busby left Australia and went back to Europe in 1832 and visited all the great wine regions of Europe and made a wine collection. So we went to the gardens of Luxembourg, the Montpellier, he went to Hermitage, he went to Bordeaux, Champagne, Burgundy, in Germany, etc. And he made this collection of wines. And in fact, he even picked up wines from South Africa on his return. And he returned to Sydney in 1834 with this, and what we call the Busby collection. So this repository of vineyard material coming from the great vineyards of Europe. And these vines were grown in the Sydney Botanic Garden. And Sydney is a very humid place, and it's not ideal for vineyards. And as Australia was progressively sort of colonised, South Australia, a couple of years later in 1836, the Busby collection was moved to the Adelaide Botanic Gardens, South Australia. And so this collection, and then this collection spread out to the growing regions of South Australia, like the Barossa Valley, McLaren Vale, etc. So we've got this genetic link, very strong genetic link to the great vineyards of Europe, which is a great story.
So like Shiraz, that is now well known.
Yes, Cabernet Sauvignon. The other big significant moment, I think, in the Australian wine industry was, the spread of phylloxera globally. And of course, it hit the eastern shores of Australia, the Sydney, Melbourne areas, actually, before it actually hit Champagne. Such was the quick spread of this aphid, this louse that devastated the vineyards of the world, Europe in particular, and California, and the South Australian government in the 1890s passed an Act of Parliament that forbade the transport of vine material into the state, and as a result of that, our vineyards have never had phylloxera. So we have this Busby descendants still growing in the Barossa Valley. So
200 years ago, Busby collection comes and it's still those clones and still those...
We've got this amazing genetic link to the greatest vineyards in the world. And the Barossa Valley today has the oldest vineyards in the world of Cabernet Sauvignon. I wouldn't be surprised, actually, if our Muscat, our old fence line block planted in 1850s.
Oh, yeah, sorry. So for the listeners, we're now tasting Madame M. It's Blanc et Blanc, but what were the grapes?
It's Muscat de Petit Grand Blanc. So that means Muscat with little berries.
That's from south of France.
It's
originally,
it's actually grown ubiquitously around the Mediterranean shores. Yeah, from Spain, south of France, Italy, Croatia, Greece, all the way to Turkey. That if you were drinking the local wine grown, anywhere on anywhere on the Mediterranean shores, you would be drinking most likely a blend of Muscat Blanc and Sauvignon Blanc, which is exactly what this is. And from time to time, another local variety, like if you're in Italy, it would be Muscat Blanc, Sauvignon Blanc and Vermentino. If you were in Spain, it would be Muscat Blanc, Sauvignon Blanc and Garnacha Blanc. So a terrific blend that I was inspired by my travels, looking at vineyards and wine and travelling on the shores of the Mediterranean. And I thought, wow, if these guys can make this beautiful wine, then I'm sure with our beautiful old vineyards that I can make an equally beautiful wine.
And this is 11% alcohol, so it's on the lighter side.
I think it ticks all the boxes,
Yeah.
Emily.
Yeah.
It's fresh, it's vibrant, it's 11%. It's in a lightweight bottle, certified sustainable also. And I think it just ticks to all the boxes for today's consumer. You know, this is a beautiful summer drink.
And the muscat gives it a bit of that more aromatic, round character. It's
Florals, aromatics. It's got lovely aromas, and the Sauvignon Blanc just dives in there with a little. It just tightens it all up nicely. You know, just a little bit of green, sort of lime and citrus, and again on the palate, it just gives it a lovely the acidity. It drives the acidity through.
Before you go to sauna, you have a glass of this. I think this is a good Finnish
In a sauna?
cottage drink.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, I've done that. I've had the pleasure of the summer house and the sauna, then the plunge in the lake.
And at the moment, it's not summer, so this is in Australia, so it's a good time to travel to Finland.
That's right.
But you're based in Barossa Valley.
Yep.
What are the characteristics of Barossa Valley compared to the neighboring regions or other parts of Australia?
Well, 50% of Australian wine now comes from South Australia due to the Phylloxera Act that we talked about in the 1890s. So it's a very important region. It's a very important area. And we're made up of, obviously, the greater, there's always the warmer climate irrigated regions, which supply the less expensive wines and the bulk wines to the market. But importantly, we have about 5 or 6 regions very close to the city of Adelaide, which are the super premium regions. And the Barossa Valley is probably it's the largest of those, and the most famous. And I guess when you look at why that is the case, it's because it has a great climate for producing quality wines. Vines love warm, sunny summers and cold, wet winters. I should say they love warm, dry, sunny summers. And cold, wet winters. And that's perfect for vines. And that's what we have in the Barossa Valley. Yeah.
Historically speaking, has Barossa Valley always made dry wines, or has it been a fortified wine region, or how has Barossa Valley changed?
Well, the Australian wine industry, and I think we've got a couple of wines on the table that really illustrate this. That for 150 years, wine was fortified. We made fortified wine, and there's a reason for
almost
that.
exclusively, or
pretty well exclusively. And the reason is that by fortifying it, it was able to travel. It was able to be shipped, and that's the important thing when we think about the great wines of the world. In the 1700s, the most expensive wine in the world was a German Riesling because of the high acidity, the low pH, and the high sugar meant that it could be transported around the world and arrive in beautiful, pristine condition. You know, this is pre-refrigerations, this is pre-sterilizations, this is all of that. So there was the natural state of the wine meant that it would be kept safe from spoilage. And fortifying was a method of that. It would keep the wine from spoiling, from bad yeast or bacteria.
So you would be competing with Portugal and port wine and Madeira and
that's it. And
sherry.
And the ships would sail back to England and be sold, they'd be full of Australian port wine, including what we called sherry. We made our own fortified whites. Back in those days, we called any wine, depending on the style. If it was a red fortified wine, we called it port. If it was a white, we called it sherry. That's how we rolled. That's how the world rolled. But then of course we had a couple of, global things changed, and of course one of them was refrigeration. Now refrigeration, I think it was Edison who invented that in the early 1900s. Yeah. But it didn't really come into food in Australia until the 30s or 40s. And then into winemaking in the 60s. And that's what transformed our ability, as well as the understanding of acidity and pH, those two things combined happened around the 1960s in Australia. And all of a sudden, we had a momentous shift to making red table wine.
Okay, so 60s and 70s is another turning point.
The turning point there, but it was really the 60s was what we call the red wine table boom.
Okay.
And then we had in the 70s the white wine table boom. And of course, with every boom, you have a bust. And in the 80s, we had a bust. So, and part of that bust is actually also very important because a lot of those beautiful old vineyards, we're talking about the Busby descendants, a lot of those beautiful old vineyards got pulled up because they were probably mismatched with the variety, the sign of the times. To be an old, there's a big story here. To be an old vineyard, you have to have probably three things going for you. You've got to be healthy, okay?
Yeah.
You've got to be producing a crop, second, and third, you've got to be part of the fads and fashions of the time. And so some of those vineyards just simply did not fall into that category and were pulled up, either not producing enough, not healthy enough, and just the wrong varieties for the time. So a lot got pulled up, but also some survived. And I'm lucky enough to control the oldest Mourvèdre vineyard. So the Barossa Valley, going back to the Barossa Valley, has the oldest varieties in the world of Cabernet Sauvignon, which Penfolds control, Shiraz, Grenache, I think Riesling, Semillon, and Mourvèdre, which is our old garden, planted 1853.
Oldest in the world in those varieties.
Yeah, oldest in the world of those varieties. It's extraordinary. It's just a beautiful tale. And when we connect that to that Busby collection and the DNA going back to the great vineyards of Europe, we have something really special in our area, on our doorstep.
And Barossa Valley, it's more known for red wines.
The climate of Barossa Valley is terrific for reds. Of course, Muscat, our old fence line block, planted in the 1850s, has withstood the test of time.
So the vines in this wine are 180?
Our oldest block is 1850s, and we've taken cuttings from those vineyards and grown them up into younger vineyards. So it's a combination. Yeah, it's not all 1850s, but it's a combination.
That's before I think Finland has had its own currency.
Right. Yeah. So it's a magnificent history. We've got a magnificent history. Talking about the Barossa Valley also, what makes it special is the soils. Australia has a very, very old soils, like millions of years. And when you look at the map from the Google map of Australia, you'll see that it's it's largely red, and that's iron. It's iron. It's rusted iron from millions of years ago. So really old soils, and that's part of our story too.
What are the soils? Is it lime?
There's a variation. There's the predominant soil type of the Barossa Valley is a red iron rich loam, which we call terra rossa, like
Terra rossa.
Yeah, red earth, and then over brown clay. From time to time, and I'm lucky enough to have what I call the El Dorado, the place of gold, is when we have the red terra rossa over brown clay over limestone. That to me is just the beautiful pinnacle soil type. And we've got a beautiful stretch of soil that runs along the winery with our vineyard sitting on it. And then, of course, we have sand. We have these ancient lake beds that were once, full of water and animals. And those animals, I'm not talking a long history, but these animals have died and formed limestone underneath. We've got limestone rocks underneath that sand. And the old garden actually sits on one of these ancient lake beds.
Okay, so it's the limestone comes from the lake beds.
Yeah, it's in this case, a geologist has surmised that, but it's limestone is old sort of, there's calcium from bones and skeletons, and I'm not a geologist, but that's apparently where limestone, how it forms.
But I think that is like interesting when you're looking at the different terroirs of Europe as well. Like a lot of the Atlantic coast, it's a lot of limestone, and you can still find all the crustaceans, oysters and oyster shells, and
it's obviously a long time ago all this happened, but it's part of wine. It's part of our story, and the sand is really important too for these old vineyards. That it's draining it. You know, if it does rain in summer, you know, the water drains away really quickly through the sand and leaves the vine dry and healthy. And I think most of the old vineyards around the world, the very old vineyards I'm talking about, 150, 170 years old, are on sand.
That's crazy. Okay, now let's taste the red wine. This is Miss Harry. I have to tell you that this is a wine when I used to work in the Monopoly over 15 years ago. Yeah. I don't remember why. I think maybe Viinilehti had something to do with it, but that was in a very big hype then. And I must have sold hundreds of bottles of Miss Harry and drank a few as well.
I think we won Wine of the Year in 2006.
Yeah.
So that's probably around the time. It's a beautiful, beautiful wine. You know, we've got a 120-year-old Grenache in this wine. You know, I think the a value proposition is there is, you know, there is nothing.
And this is a classic Southern France blend of Grenache, Shiraz, and Mourvèdre.
Yeah, and so it also speaks of the Barossa Valley. These are the traditional varieties, red varieties that were grown in the Barossa Valley, and it's a beautiful blend. We've, you know, over time we've changed our winemaking. You know, I'm always searching to improve what we do. You know, hence travels, you know, visiting the coastline of Mediterranean, etc. Looking at, you know, getting inspirations and just, you know, slight improvements both in the vineyard and winemaking. And, you know, now all our Grenache from these old vines, they're very old vines. They have to be hand-picked, but we whole bunch ferment the Grenache and the Mourvèdre. So it's literally whole berries with their stalks.
Okay.
The stalks, when we talk about stalks, you know, most people, it conjures an image of something green. But in our case, with our beautiful sunshine and dry climate and warmth, our stalks are super ripe. They're yellowed, they're browned off, they're ripe stalks. So they're not green, stalky, crunchy stalks. They're providing this beautiful tannin background, both for the structure of the wine and the colour. It helps to stabilise the colour. So it's a you know, incremental changes over the last 15 years have led to what we're doing now and just making a beautiful, beautiful wine called Miss Harry.
How has your winemaking changed? That's one question I wanted to ask.
Well,
you started almost 30 years ago.
My first, 27 years ago.
27 years ago.
It started, yeah. My first sale was 27 years ago, basically.
Okay.
You know, just incrementally. You know, just the what I'd learned from my studies and travels, and talking to some of the great winemakers of the world. So you start from somewhere, and that was I had a great starting point after working for one of the best winemakers in Australia for a decade, and he encouraging me with letters of introduction. Back then there was no email. You went with a letter of introduction.
Can I ask who did you work for?
I worked for a company called Petaluma in Australia, and Brian Crozer was the boss, my boss, and you know, it was filled with right then at that stage. I was young. I was 22 when I joined. Really, the cream of the wine industry was there. Len Evans is probably Australia's most famous wine man. He was chairman of the board. It was an extraordinary place to be growing up in wine.
I remember hearing this saying that rest of the world, when you say BC, it means before Christ. But in Australia, wine country, it means before Crozer.
Yeah,
that he has really revolutionized and changed the industry.
Yeah, he's a remarkable person, and he's a terrific guy. He's been an amazing mentor and encouraging me, phenomenally.
And he's all for quality.
that's it. We had this conversation just recently, a few months ago. We had lunch just a couple of months ago, actually. And, he just said, Dean, just stick, whatever you do, quality it'll always win. And I think I'd sort of worked that out, but, in some ways I'd sort of stick, if we just stick to quality, people will always want to drink quality. And he just, reassured me and reconfirmed all of that. And I do. I think he's exactly right. People will always want quality, whether it's wine, food, clothing, cars, whatever.
So Australia has gone through booms and busts, as you said, in the 70s and 80s for red and white wines. How is the industry doing now? We have all sorts of, we have climate issues, we have trade issues, we have consumer behaviors are changing. So
the world's a crazy place right now.
Yeah, it's not an easy place to navigate as a winemaker, but how does it look like from your perspective?
Well, I think sticking to quality has been great. We're doing very well as a wine company. I made sort of some hard decisions a few years ago that when you look at things, there was, I guess, COVID probably started you had to look carefully at that. Australia obviously suffered a massive tariff from China. So we've been through a tariff issue that's a lot harder. It was a lot harder. It was 200%. So
200%?
220, 212%.
Okay. Trump levels.
Well, a lot bigger than Trump levels, really. So we've been through that. Have we recovered from it? Well, it's changed things dramatically, and it's made me really considered and focus on what are our vineyards, our key vineyards, what are our wines, what's our business stand for, and I think wineries that have gone through a similar process are probably doing quite well. There's a lot to it, and I guess for a time, making wine for 27 years for myself, but also making wine in general for almost 40 years, I've had lucky enough to have a great sort of experience behind me, and that counts for a lot, I think. Being through some riding through challenges and overcoming them and working out things.
So you're optimistic.
I'm an optimist.
That's good.
Yeah, very much so. I think my friends say that I play a bit of golf, and I might be in the worst position on the course, but I still think I can get out of it. And my friends are amazed how optimistic I am. So I'm very much an optimist.
The next wine is something I'm super excited to taste. I read about this vineyard, and on the label it says single vineyard planted in 1853. Old Garden Vineyard. Can you tell us more?
Well, that's it's an incredible place. The person who planted this vineyard, it was he moved. He bought this land in the early 1840s, and there is a chance that this vineyard is slightly older. But I'm working on diary records of the first crop. And that sort of designates that the earliest it could have been planted, well, the latest it could have been planted is 1853. It could have been planted earlier. And
South Australia, you said, was
1836. So there's Shiraz vines that are 1847, and there's Grenache that's 1847 or 1848. But anyway. It's 1848, 1853. It's not too much difference.
No.
It's wonderful. It was a much larger vineyard. All the settlements then were obviously by waterways, by the rivers, by the creeks, and they needed the water to live, and so they built their little huts with the local stone and timber. By the creeks, and they planted vineyards. And this vineyard sits on the valley floor, just off the river that runs through the valley. And it was a much larger vineyard, but progressively over time has been pulled up and replanted with, fashions, fads, etc. But 8 rows remain. And I guess these 8 rows remain because they were the healthiest, always produced the best crop. So they stayed there. And this is where the deep sand is. And, so just 8 rows. Where a vine has died, there is no replant. So every vine is 1853. It's just quite a remarkable, incredible place. It's quite a spiritual place, actually, in some ways. To walk amongst these vines is a very humbling experience.
Well, I'm trying to do in my head like what was happening in 1853. It's the world was quite different back then.
Yeah, it would have been a tough life.
Is it before the Civil War in the US?
We sell this wine in America, and the Americans say it's what Lincoln was drinking. So, yeah.
Lincoln was drinking. Huh? And the variety is Mourvèdre in Finnish, Mourvèdre in French, or something like that.
Yeah, the variety is actually Spanish. It originated in Spain. My professor at UC Davis actually teamed up with a geneticist, and they worked out where all the varieties actually originated, which is really, really interesting. So Mourvèdre, Spanish, first written word was in the 1100s, called monastrell. The grape around the monastery. And the monks probably could write. They're the only ones who could write back then. So wrote it down and called it monastrell. There was 2 villages on the coast of Spain. One's called Mourvèdre. One is called Mataro. And just like we call the wines of, we call the wines of Bordeaux, we call them Bordeaux, where they came from, the port that they sailed from. Well, I think the similar case, they called the local wines Mataro because they sailed from Mataro. They called Mourvèdre because it came from the port of Mourvèdre. But when you look at the map of Spain today, you don't see Mourvèdre because it had a name change to Sagunto, back to Sagunto. Which is great because there's also a reference to Sagunto from a long, long time ago because Hannibal, when he marched his troops and elephants to sack Rome from Morocco, from his city on where I'm talking about, he stopped off at Sagunto. So I think that his troops got drunk on.
So Lincoln. Hannibal.
Yeah, it's incredible. It's great.
The list is pretty good.
Yeah, it's the world history, and this is wine. Wine is entwined with history through the whole thing. It's a great story.
One of my favorite red wines of southern France is from Bandol, and it's heavily influenced by Mourvèdre.
Yeah. So I chose to call it Mourvèdre because. Well, my couple of years of study in California, it dawned on me that most people in the world called it Mourvèdre, and I was prepared to follow that course. So we call it Mataro in the Barossa Valley a lot, and also Mourvèdre.
Okay. Well, this is a deep, intense wine, but it's very structured, fresh with acidity.
Yeah, it's
2021.
Yeah, 2021. So you asked earlier my winemaking, how I've changed my winemaking. And one of the key events in my life was actually this attending this Grenache conference in Gigondas in France, south of France, in 2011, where 120 winemakers from around the world were invited. And I was lucky enough to be one of them. And we had a 3-day loving of talking about Grenache. I stayed a couple of days later and just visited friends and wineries in the region. And it really dawned on me that, I'd always wanted to explore this whole bunch winemaking, but I was concerned about our stalks. And I realised that, well, I don't have to pick the whole vineyard. I can just go to the ripest part of that vineyard. It might be the crest of the hill where there's less leaves and more exposure and the stalks are riper, and start to introduce this whole bunch into my winemaking. So 2012, I started with 5% whole bunch in this wine, and 10 years later, we have 100%. So just incremental, careful, small steps, incremental changes to get to where we are today. And I think we've transformed this wine into just something that's absolutely gorgeous.
So 100% whole bunch. And you age in French oak.
In French oak and new barrels. So we're not copying Bandol that use largely just old, large, very large format like the Tournes or the Foods.
Yeah.
We're using small barrique to assist with the structure. You know, so I visit these regions and it's great because when you travel the world and you go to a region, you sort of learn more about your own backyard by doing that. And you realise, well, hang on, we've got slightly different climates. Our fruit doesn't quite, you know, these are more tannic or these are less tannic. And so you go back to your own vineyards and your own grapes and you work out, well, why, you understand why they're doing it. And then, so should we do that? Or no, we shouldn't do that in this case. Or we need to do this to make a better wine. So, learning, visiting, watching, learning what they do tells me more about my backyard and what I should do. So we don't copy, we adjust to what we have.
You get inspired.
Absolutely inspired. It's great.
So 8 rows. How many bottles can you produce of this?
Well, the crop varies. You know, I've always said to myself that I just want this vineyard to express itself every season, and I won't tamper with it. So we cut it back, prune it every year, and we let it do its thing. And it does its own thing because its roots are so deep in the ground, they probably go down 6 metres, or probably more, 10 metres. And what's happening underground is its own thing. So what's happening up on top of the soil isn't really affecting the vine so much. It's more about moisture, things like that. And the vine senses this, and I think it regulates itself when it's that old. It's regulating itself because we don't irrigate. So the vine is doing its own thing, adjusting to the variations of the the immediate seasons before it, the winter, the spring, things like that. And sometimes the crop's high, sometimes it's low, and mostly it's in between. So we have produced from 8 rows, it's about a hectare. So in some cases we've produced 8 tonnes, which is quite a lot, quite high for a hectare. But then sometimes there's 3 tonnes.
Okay.
So, quite a variation, but normally around 4 or 5.
And this is, do we know, if somebody's interested, is that in Alco selection as well?
I think it is, yes. I would have to check with Jean-Francois, but I'm fairly sure it is. Yeah, I think all our wines are. But gorgeous, isn't that? Isn't that beautiful fruit and structure? Oh. It's beautiful. I was lucky enough to be invited to the Institute of Masters of Wine's 60th anniversary at Vintners Hall on the Thames in London. They invited me to present this wine at their 60th anniversary. So
I feel like Finnish people are quite well aware of Australian wines, and this wine is on the more serious note, and it's quite intense. You can really imagine that this comes from very old wines because the fruit is so intense, but it's quite fresh as well. So I think the whole bunch winemaking and when do you pick it? Do you pick it a bit? Has that varied or?
The Mourvèdre is a very late ripening variety. So typically it's one of the last vineyards in the Barossa Valley to be picked. I've picked this as late as the Australian May, which in Northern Hemisphere is November. Incredibly late, at 13.5% alcohol. It's incredibly late. Normally this is picked around late April, which is your late October.
Still quite late.
Very late. Yeah. So by this time, the autumn has approached, is on us. And it's a lovely time actually with these later ripening varieties because the leaves, we're getting the cold nights. really cold nights in the Barossa Valley at this time of year, and it takes and just medium warm days of about 25, but it takes a long time to get to that 25, and then it starts to drop off again in the late afternoon. So what Oregon call hang time with their Pinot Noirs. And I remember a winemaker telling me in Oregon, he said, you want to match where the best wines are made, where the vine just ripens before the season closes. And I think in this case, Mourvèdre in particular really answers that. We just get it right before the season closes out. And this hang time period is important too, because the leaves have started to change. And when the leaves change, that if they're not green, there's no photosynthesis, there's no sugar going into the grapes. But we have the sun still, and we have the grape on the vine, and we're getting ripeness. We're getting this ripeness without the sugar.
Is that related to like Italian winemaking a bit, like how they do in Amarone region?
That's sort of more of a drying out. Okay. This is just where we're getting flavour ripeness without the sugar going into the berry.
They're not shriveling on the bunches.
That's right.
Yeah, okay.
In this case, they're not shriveling on the bunches. Okay. That's right. We're As opposed to the Italian Passamento or the Pesamento or the Ripasso is actually the sugar being increased through drying.
So in Finland at the moment, you can sell 8% wine in the supermarkets, and
I heard that.
And there is I think there is a trend going that people want to drink more on the 11% maybe than the classic 50% that probably Barossa Valley has been making fair bit. So, but what are the trends in Australia?
I think globally, people are drinking lighter in alcohol. I've never made that super ripe, overripe, I might say, wine. Our wines have always been 13 to 14%. With our reds, balance is such an important thing for quality wine. And alcohol plays a big part in that balance. And quite frankly, I think if it's over 14%, it loses its balance very quickly. And there's a few other things I can talk about that, but they're getting a little bit technical. It seems to just throw the tannins out too. I think they become a little bit more bitter, which I don't like. And really, to answer your question, people are drinking. They don't want as much alcohol. They want quality.
Is there like a trend among winemakers of certain styles? Are they shifting in Australia? Because we don't get that many small producer wines from Australia and Finland. It's more of the big guys that are on the market. But
well, I'm a small family-owned winery. Actually, just going back to the alcohol on the trend factor. Alcohol plays a very important part in the body, in our sensation of balance. And I think that when we're talking about low alcohol wines or non-alcoholic wines, you've got to replace that body with the alcohol. Plays 10% of the wine or 12% of the wine. It's significant. And how we replace that is really they've only come up with sugar. and to me, if we're just taking alcohol away and increasing our sugar, well, is that a good thing? I'm not so sure it is. Or synthetics and things like that, which that concerns me too. Yeah. And that's what I like. I mean, in 2005, I made an 8% white wine. I've got it in my cellar still. It's amazing. It's still alive and fresh and beautiful.
White wine or red wine?
White wine at 8%. I was way ahead of my time. 2005, 20 years ahead of my time.
So it wasn't an accident?
No, I purposely did it. We didn't sell any. I was just ahead of my time. And I've still got that in the cellar.
You can now sell it to Finland.
And it drinks beautifully. It drinks beautifully. It's amazing, amazingly fresh.
We need to talk to Johnny about this.
Yeah, so we do need some alcohol. You need the right sort of variety to work with it. And I think our Madame M at 11 is a lovely balanced wine and providing that lower alcohol experience.
I wanted to taste a part of the history of Australian winemaking.
Sure, this is great.
I think we're already tasting the history with the almost 200-year-old vineyard, but this is from a region you know it probably quite well, Rutherglen.
Rutherglen, totally, yeah.
I worked here, not in this winery. This is Stanton and Killeen, but it's a Rutherglen Muscat.
Great.
So it's a fortified wine,
Yep.
and it says 20 years average age. So if I'm correct, this is it's always a blend of different aged barrels,
Right.
like a Solera system.
Yes. Yeah.
And you probably can tell us more about this style of wine than I can.
Well, I was lucky enough when I was studying, doing my winemaking degree, many years ago, over 40 years ago. I visited Rutherglen, and we had a 1905 Muscat out of barrel. So that would probably be part of this Solera system, which is great.
It looks like balsamic vinegar, color-wise. It looks like something you could use on a salad dressing, but it's wine.
Yeah, it is. It's wine. It's great wine. And I wonder too, it's Muscat. I wonder whether it's the Muscat of Alexandria or the Muscat Blanc, a Petit Grain, which is in here.
Let's see.
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure on if I can determine that.
No, it's pretty hard. I'll look it up.
No, and so this style of winemaking and these wineries, I visited quite a few of them, and they still had barrels from 19th century and early
Incredible,
20th century, and they're still doing these blends out of wines that have been aging for over 100 years. And
Just incredible. We've taken a small part of our old fence line, Muscat, the 1850s. Every year we just pick a little bit. I've got this beautiful old little hand press, little basket press, and we make a few dozen and fortify it.
Oh.
And we've laid them down in the cellar, and we've done this for posterity, really. So this old fortified style, which obviously is still made in Rutherglen, largely disappeared in the Barossa Valley, but as a nod to our history of these beautiful old vines, these Muscat vines, only 170-year-old vines, we're resurrecting this way of making wine, and it's fun. It's just great fun, and it's important. It's an important part of our history. It's a beautiful wine, isn't it?
This is one of those wines that when you taste it, it's so complex and big. So it's sweet, but it's very balanced. It has some smoky characters, and this is incredible.
Toffee, marzipan.
Very hard to finish a bottle. So I think the Viinilehti people here can enjoy it. But if our listeners have never tried a Muscat from Australia, 40 white wine, these are something really special.
Yes.
Maybe for the Christmas table or like a celebration dinner.
Yeah.
It's not a everyday wine.
Yeah, I think the Christmas table is a great thing.
Wow.
Well, there's some history on the table here. We've got the Rutherglen Muscat, Miss Harry from 120-year-old Grenache, and Muscat 1850s Muscat Blanc, and the old Garden 1850s. So, wow, we put it together. Similarly, that's some lineup.
That's a good lineup. Yeah. And I'm sorry, the last wine is something that the listeners can't buy from Alko. That was
out of your cellar, is it?
It's not from my cellar. It's it's from Juha Berilon's cellar, the man who started the Viinilehti.
Oh, okay.
And Decanter shop.
Great.
Some 30 odd years ago.
Right.
And he's been kind enough to give us a few samples from his cellar that we can open on this podcast episode. So.
Oh, wow, that's great. Yeah, cheers.
Before we go and start enjoying the Finnish summer, there might be some people listening who are traveling or living in Australia maybe, and we might even have some international listeners because this is the first episode in English. Can you visit Hewitson and how is the wine tourism and industry in Barossa Valley and Australia in general? Do you recommend?
Absolutely. It's a great way to explore the country. The Barossa Valley is 1 hour from Adelaide, which is an international airport city. You can fly direct in from a lot of Asian countries. So if you're coming from Finland, you can easily stop off in the Middle East or one of the other Asian cities and then fly direct into Adelaide. 1 hour. We actually have guest suites at our winery. We've got a cellar door, a tasting room. It's great. It's a beautiful, any time of year. In winter, we have a roaring fireplace, the original kitchen fire. The actual cellar door is an old 1850s building, one of the original settlements. It's great. We've had beautiful, I would say unparalleled views over the vineyard and the river. I mentioned the river that runs through the valley. We have, kangaroos live amongst our vines. You can see it all. It's beautiful.
I hope to come to Australia maybe next winter. I'm not sure.
Well, you've got to come and visit.
If I come, then I'll give you a call.
You must. You come and visit, and you're very, very welcome. It's we're right in the middle of the Barossa Valley also, so we're close to everything.
Perfect. Yeah. Hey, Dean, thank you so much for coming to Viinipodi and sharing the wines and stories.
Thanks so much.
And
Absolute pleasure.
I hope you enjoy Finland and you get to go to a sauna and maybe a bit of a swim in there.
I always enjoy coming to Finland and most times have the pleasure of the sauna. Thank you.
Perfect.
Cheers.
Kun haluat viinistä ja viiniharrastuksesta enemmän irti, Decanter-myymälät ja verkkokauppa palvelee suomalaisia viinin ystäviä yli 30 vuoden kokemuksella. Meiltä löydät laadukkaat viinilasit, viinikaapit sekä laajan valikoiman keittiötarvikkeita huippubrändeiltä kuten Riedel, Peugeot, De Bayer, Coravin ja Bar Professional. Decanter, herkuttelijan valinta jo vuodesta 1987.
No niin, tervetuloa takaisin Viinipodin pariin. Nyt kun mä oon täällä yksin ja mulla ei ole Juunasta kenen kanssa höpistä, niin pidetään tää loppukin lyhyenä. Olipa kiva jutella Deanin kanssa. Toivottavasti myös oma englanninkielen taito oli sillä tasolla, että saitte jotain selvää. Ja näistä viineistä mä nyt ehkä haluan sanoa sen verran, että on kyllä koko linja oli hirveän miellyttäviä. Ja no, tähän Miss Harryin mulla on itsellä tosiaan tämmönen vähän nostalginenkin suhde, koska se oli yksi ensimmäisiä viinejä silloin nuorena, josta tykkäsin. Siinä oli runsautta ja hedelmää ja sitten kuitenkin sen verran pyöreät tanniinit, että oma makujakso siitä kestää silloin. En ole pitkään aikaa maistanut, mutta on se edelleen se on tosi hyvä viini. Mä en tiedä, olisi pitänyt ehkä kysyä, että onko ton viinityyli kanssa vähän muuttunut. Musta tuntuu, että se saattoi olla ennen vielä vähän raskaampi. Nyt se on jotenkin tommonen tosi raikas ja vähän parfyyminenkin. Et mun mielestä Miss Harry on edelleen ihan mahtava viini. Mutta sitten tää vanhojen köynnösten Single Vineyard oli kyllä aika mahtava. En ole ennen maistanut ja tätä ei kyllä nyt näkynyt tuolla Alko-sivuilla. Kävin katsomassa, että tätä ei ikävä kyllä taida tällä hetkellä saada Alkosta, mutta ehkä tässä, jos seuraillaan tilannetta, niin saattaa olla, että sinnekin tilausvalikoimaan ilmestyy. Joo, 1853 istutettu tarha. Ei oikein osaa edes käsittää, että kuinka paljon maailma on muuttunut sen jälkeen, kun nuo köynnökset on istutettu. Ja sitten annan kyllä suosituksen myös, että jos löytää matkoilta, erityisesti jos Australiassa käy, että musta tuntuu, että sieltä näitä Rutherglen muskatteja löytyy ja mä luulen, että Lontoostakin voisi löytyä aika paljon viinikaupoista. Et uskoisin, että Englanti on edelleen noilla aika hyvä markkina. Nämä on, mä en oikein tiedä, ei näitä ihan portviiniin mun mielestä voi verrata, koska nämä on kyllä hyvin erilaisia, mutta ehdottomasti kannattaa ottaa kokeiluja, vaikka ne maksaisi vähän enemmän, niin varaa sen sitten jonnekin joulupöytään ja uskon, että kaikki, jotka tämmöisiä viinejä pääsee maistamaan, niin ei tule kyllä petty. Syvän rusinaisia pahteisia, kuitenkin hapokkuutta löytyy ja on hirveän raikkaassa kunnossa tämäkin, vaikka tässä onkin tämmöinen lähes balsamikomainen väri. Australian viineihin kannattaa tutustua tarkemmin. Sieltä tulee hienoja Rieslingejä, hienoja Chardonnayta, hienoa Chenin Blancia, monenlaisia valkoviinejä, myös sitten just Muscat de Alexandria, tommosia vähän aromaattisempia. Ja sitten tietty punaviineissä löytyy kaikkea vähän kevyemmästä siihen tuhdeempaan. Et oikein vanhojen köynnösten Shiraz on monesti niinku tuhdeista tuhdimpia. Sitten löytyy tämmöisiä yli 100-vuotiaita Mourvèdreja, mutta sitten löytyy myös kevyitä Pinot Noireja ja heleämpiä viinejä. Ja jos mä oon nyt ymmärtänyt oikein, niin tämä natural viiniliike on Australiassa kanssa saanut aika paljon nostetta ja siellä on paljon viinintekijöitä, jotka tekee asioita hyvin eri tavalla kuin mitä ehkä Suomesta ollaan totuttu maistelemaan, tai Suomessa ollaan totuttu maistelemaan. Mutta hei, pidemmittä puhetta lähdetään kesälomalle. Kiitoksia Vindirect, kiitoksia Temptech, kiitoksia Clos Alkio ja kiitoksia Viinilehti.
Oletko valmis makumatkalle, joka vie sinut suoraan Prioratin sydämeen Kataloniaan? Clos Alkio yhdistää perinteet ja modernin viinin valmistuksen. Luomme ainutlaatuisia viinejä, jotka kertovat tarinoita alkuperästään. Viinit valmistetaan käsityönä luonnonmukaisin menetelmin, alueen perinteitä kunnioittaen. Tutustu verkkosivuillamme laajaan valikoimaan mielenkiintoisia uutuuksia viinin harrastajille Aino, Hiitola, Femme de Vida ja Caminito a Motel. Clos Alkio, suomalainen viinitila Prioratissa.